Count Magnus Gabriel de Gardie was a Swedish statesman and military man. He became a member of the Swedish Privy Council in 1647 and came to be the holder of 3 of the 5 offices counted as the great officers of the realm, namely Lord High Treasurer, Lord High Chancellor and Lord High Steward. He also served as Governor-General in the Swedish Dominion of Livonia. Biography, Birth and Ancestry. Magnus Gabriel de Gardie was born on 15 October 1622. The place of his birth was Reval, Estonia, which at the time was a Swedish dominion where Magnus Gabriel's father Jacob de Gardie served as governor. Jacob de Gardie, Count of Laco, was a prominent military commander who served as Lord High Constable of Sweden from 1620 until his death in 1652. Father of Jacob, and grandfather of Magnus Gabriel, was Baron Pontus de Gardie, a French mercenary who had been in Danish service but made a career in Sweden after having been captured by Swedish troops in 1565. Pontus married Sophia Gyllenhielm, the daughter of King John III, in 1580. Magnus Gabriel's mother was He, daughter of Lord High Steward Magnus He and Britta Lejon Harvud. Ebba had a relationship with young King Gustavus Adolphus, probably during the years 1613 to 1615. Gustavus's mother, Christina of Holstein-Gottorp, ruined her son's wish to marry He, who in 1618 instead married Jacob de Gardie. Ebba and Jacob had 14 children, of whom 7 lived to maturity. These 7 were Magnus Gabriel, Maria Sophia, Jacob Casimir, Pontus Frederick, Christina Katharina, Axel Julius and Ebba Margaretha. Career. Being a member of a wealthy family of the highest esteem, de Gardie was predestined for an eminent career. He received a thorough education from his teacher Matthias Björnklau and was in 1639 elected Rector Illustris at Uppsala University, thanks to his ancestry. The next year, he travelled abroad to complete his training. Much of this period was spent in France and the Netherlands. When the Torstenson War between Sweden and Denmark broke out in 1643, de Gardie returned to his native Sweden, and learned about warfare under the command of Field Marshal Gustav Horn, 1644–1654, under Queen Christina. Early on during the reign of Queen Christina, de Gardie became the Queen's favourite, being reportedly both well-mannered and good-looking might have helped de Gardie to gain the Queen's favour. His knowledge concerning culture, politics and representation might also have impressed the Queen, just as his talent for organising festivities and surrounding himself with extravagance and magnificence. His skill and interest in the mentioned areas was in demand during a time when the power should not only be well-learned, resolute and rooted in history, but have a sense of details and possess splendour as well. In 1645 he was promoted to Colonel of the Life Guards. In 1646, de Gardie was head of a diplomatic mission to France in order to find Queen Christina musicians for her Swedish court. The mission was a success for de Gardie, who upon his return to Sweden received distinctions of an unparalleled amount. Furthermore, the Queen arranged a wedding for him and the Queen's cousin Maria for a sign of Sveibrücken at the royal palace. After the wedding, de Gardie was made a Privy Councillor. On 17 April 1648, he was promoted to general and served as such under the future king, and his own brother-in-law, Charles Gustav, during the conquest of Prague that took place in the final months of the 30 Years' War. Despite making only a slight contribution in the war, de Gardie was eventually rewarded 22,500 riksdaler, more than any other general. The same year, he was created Count of Arensberg. De Gardie began his first of 2 terms as Governor-General of the Swedish Dominion of Livonia in 1649. At the coronation of Queen Christina, in 1650, he was entrusted with carrying the royal banner. A year later, in 1651, he ended his first term in Livonia and was appointed Marshal of the realm. In 1652, he became Lord High Treasurer, which was one of 5 great officers of the realm and, as such, one of the most prominent and powerful members of the Privy Council as well as head of the chambers. Also in 1652, de Gardie was appointed Law Speaker of Västergötland and Dalsland. When his father Jacob died that year, Magnus Gabriel inherited Laco Castle and became Count of Laco. Falling out of favour, in 1653, de Gardie fell out of favour with the Queen. He and his family had to leave the court, and for the rest of Christina's reign, de Gardie lived on his manors in some kind of an exile. However, Queen Christina abdicated soon thereafter and was replaced on the throne by Charles Gustav, the brother of de Gardie's wife Maria Euphrosyne, 1654–1660. Under Charles X Gustav. When Charles Gustav, de Gardie's brother-in-law, ascended to the throne, it meant a return to the public for de Gardie. In August 1654, he became governor of Västergötland, Dalsland and Halland, and in December that year he was made Chancellor of Uppsala University. In 1655, he was for the second time chosen for the office of General Governor of Livonia. He also became Lieutenant General of the Swedish troops in Hungary, Estonia and Livonia, which meant that he commanded troops in the wars against Poland and Russia. It appears that de Gardie was anything but a splendid military commander, as he received much more complaints than praise from the king for his actions in that area. During negotiations with Poland, de Gardie was the prime Swedish representative. He took part in the deliberations leading to the Swedish-Polish Treaty of Oliva in 1660. King Charles X Gustav died in early 1660. In accordance to his will, de Gardie was appointed Lord High Chancellor and, as such, member of the regency that ruled Sweden during the minority of Charles XI (1660–1672). In the regency, de Gardie was the most renowned and influential among the regency members, although he was often challenged. This might have been due to the fact that he was, reportedly, unable to work enough and that he often left the center of power to spend significant time on his different estates, a disadvantage for both the government and de Gardie's own position of power. Being experienced and having many important relationships, he was a prominent member of a regency, but he looked too much to the past and the traditions during the 30 Years' War and therefore lacked a vision suitable to the demands of a new era. The regency was divided into parties. De Gardie was the main representative of the party in favor of warlike adventures and a close relationship to France. The opponents, represented by Lord High Treasurer Gustaf Bond, Lord High Steward.He the Younger and Johan Gyllenstierna, were advocates of a more peaceful and economical way. The opinions of de Gardie's side most often won out, and therefore, Sweden was nearly drawn into wars against Russia and Poland during the Regency period. Early on in the period, in 1661, Sweden and France signed a treaty which included a secret paragraph committing Sweden to support the French candidate on the first vacancy of the Polish throne, in exchange for a large sum of money. In April 1672, the two allies signed a new treaty in Stockholm. According to this treaty, Sweden would keep an army of 16,000 men in its German dominions to make sure the German states would not interfere in a war between France and its enemies the Netherlands and Spain. In return, Sweden would receive 400,000 riksdaler annually in peacetime. In wartime, the amount would be increased to 600,000 riksdaler. In a Sweden with great financial problems, these subsidies was, in Count de la Gardie's thinking, a more attractive way to improve the state's finances than a reduction, which would mean that lands granted the nobility would be reclaimed by the crown. De la Gardie himself was responsible for parts of the financial trouble Sweden faced at the time, created by Johan Palmstruck and his paper money. He made several donations from the crown to himself and used national resources for private matters. Meanwhile, since they did not receive the funds necessary for maintenance, the navy went into decline, and soldiers died or ran away from the army since they did not receive the pay. 1672 to 1686, under Charles XI. In December 1672, King Charles XI came to age. Despite what people might have anticipated, de la Gardie now became mightier than ever before. The young and inexperienced king seems to have been glad to take the advice of his Lord High Chancellor de la Gardie, who tried to increase the king's power in order to increase his own. However, from 1675, his influence decreased. That year, bound by the treaty with France, Sweden entered the Franco-Dutch War by invading Brandenburg. Although being numerically superior, the Swedish forces lost at Fehrbellin, which led to Denmark being encouraged to attack Sweden. Thus, the Scanian War was initiated. In connection with King Charles's coronation the same year, de la Gardie was accused of high treason, an accusation that soon was judged as unjustified. During the Scanian War, de la Gardie commanded troops that fought against the Norwegian army in Bohuslän. With this war operation, like earlier operations, de la Gardie lacked success, and suffered a considerable setback at Uddevalla in 1677. Reduction in absolutism. The fall of de la Gardie. The harsh conditions in the latter half of the 1670s, with the war as the main cause, could be attributed to the treaty with France, for which de la Gardie had been a spokesman. The hard times came to lead to the upheavals in 1680. The financial crisis in Sweden made King Charles XI assemble the Riksdag of the Estates in October 1680. Here, the king finally pushed through the reduction ordeal, something that had been discussed in the Riksdag since 1650. It meant that any land or object previously owned by the crown and lent or given away, including counties, baronies and lordships, could be recovered. In principle, the entire Swedish elite of nobles was demolished. Another important decision made during the assembly was that concerning the Privy Council. Since 1634, it had been mandatory for the king to take the advice from this council. During the Scanian War, the members of the council had internal feuds, and the king more or less ruled without listening to their advice. At the 1680 assembly, he asked the estates whether he was still bound to the council, to which the estates gave him his desired reply. He was not bound by anyone other than himself, and thereby the absolute monarchy was formally established in Sweden. De la Gardie had tried to rally the members of the Privy Council to withstand the development leading to absolutism, but in vain. Prior to the Riksdag, de la Gardie had been removed from the Lord High Chancellor office and instead been made Lord High Steward. Thus, de la Gardie lost influence in general and on the country's foreign policy in particular. Perhaps no other man was as negatively affected by the reduction as de la Gardie. He was judged owing the state a huge sum and lost his whole fortune through the recoveries made by the crown. For example, his Laco estate was recovered in 1.5 days. The only estates he could keep were Venngarn and Huljantorp. In 1675 a special commission was appointed to inquire into the doings of de la Gardie and his high aristocratic colleagues, and on May 27, 1682 it decided that the regions and the Senate were solely responsible for dilapidations of the realm, the compensation due by them to the crown being assessed at 4 million riksdaler. De Gardie was treated with relative leniency, but he received permission to retire to his estates for the rest of his life, spending his final days on Venngarn. He could not understand what crimes he had committed. Desperately, he concluded that, "What I have acquired during 38 years, and my father and ancestors during 40 years, is gone." Magnus Gabriel de Gardie died at Venngarn on April 26, 1686. De Gardie had been partly responsible for the treaty with France and had worked hard to increase the young King Charles's power. It might seem ironic that the treaty helped moving Sweden into a deep crisis financially, which, together with the level of power Charles had attained, in turn led to the reduction. Thus, de Gardie's contributions came to be a large factor behind his own fall from power and richness. Personal life, wife and children. On the 7th of March 1647, in the chapel at the Royal Palace Sträkrona, de Gardie married Maria Eufrosine of Zweibrücken. Maria Eufrosine was a cousin of Queen Christina and a sister of the future King Charles X Gustav. Sources describe her as a poor princess that benefited greatly by her wedding with the richest of the Swedish magnates. The Queen, who had mediated to make the marriage possible, arranged the wedding. The marriage of Magnus Gabriel and Maria Eufrosine is reported as having been happy. Maria Eufrosine gave birth to 11 children, of whom only 3 survived their own parents. These 3 were Privy Councillor Gustav Adolf, Katharina Charlotte and Hedvig Ebba. Property owner and constructor during his life, de Gardie succeeded in adding large numbers of estates and castles to his possession. In his prime, he owned estates and castles in the provinces of Uppland, Nark, Västmanland and Västergötland. Among these were Karlberg, Drottningholm, Jakobsdal, Venngarn, Ekholmen, Kegelholm, Laco, Traneberg, Mariedal, Katrinaberg and Hollantor. Moreover, de Gardie owned large properties in Livonia, Finland, Pomerania and Mecklenburg, at the time all parts of Sweden. Every nobleman needed a well-suited place to live in the capital Stockholm. Magnus Gabriel de Gardie's father, Jacob, built a grand palace close to the royal palace. It was called the de Gardie Palace, or Macklow's Palace. When Jacob died in 1652, it was inherited by Magnus Gabriel. The palace was the foremost among the private residences in Stockholm, and contained movable property more magnificent than what the royal palace did. De Gardie is known as being an eager constructor, and the amount of different building projects he was running was huge. In 1674, the Italian diplomat Lorenzo Magalotti estimated that de Gardie had at least 50 ongoing projects in Sweden and its provinces, excluding the 37 churches he was constructing or repairing at the time. One of the churches de Gardie restored was the Abbey Church of Varnum, in which he established a family mausoleum where Magnus Gabriel himself, his wife Maria Eufrosine, the son Gustav Adolf and daughter-in-law Elizabeth Oxenstierna buried. At Laco, de Gardie ordered considerable extensions, starting in 1654. For example, a 4th floor was added on the keep, as were a castle chapel. The staff of the castle increased from 83 employees to 222 between 1662 and 1678, a sign of the development of the nobility's estates into own societies, which was not uncommon at the time. Cultural contributions. De la Gardie is considered one of the biggest patrons of science and art in Swedish history. Architects, sculptors and painters were brought to Sweden to make contributions to de la Gardie's constructions and restorations. Jean de la Vallée and Nicodemus Tessin the Elder were among the architects that de la Gardie engaged to fulfill his building ambitions. In 1666, de la Gardie made sure Sweden got an organized heritage conservation, the first of its kind in Europe. Codex Argenteus. The Codex Argenteus, also known as the Silver Bible, is a 6th-century manuscript that was bought and brought to Uppsala University, where it still remains, by de la Gardie. It was brought to Sweden the first time in 1648, but Isaac Vossius, a Dutch librarian of Queen Christina, took it to his hometown. In 1662, de la Gardie bought the Codex, and in 1669 he donated it to the university, after first having it bound in a chase silver binding. Silver throne. A silver throne donated by de la Gardie holds a central position in Riksalen in the Stockholm Palace. The throne was a gift from de la Gardie to Queen Christina for her coronation in 1650. De la Gardie engaged Abraham Drentwit of Augsburg to produce it. Cultural reference. De la Gardie's ancestral home provides a chilling backdrop for the short story Count Magnus by Montague Rhodes James. However, the title character of the story bears little resemblance to the historical figure. Ancestry.